The Author's Shelf.
The Author's Shelf.
The Author's Shelf. The Author's Shelf. It's about books and stuff.
Yes, the truth is out there and we'll endeavour to discover it on today's show. Good afternoon, I'm Georgie Donaghy and welcome to the Author's Shelf. On today's show, I'll be chatting with George Ivanoff. George is an author of over 70 books for children and teenagers, his specialty teen sci-fi. So sit back and relax as we bring you the stories beyond the page. You're listening to the Author's Shelf on 2SR 99.7 FM Sound of the Sutherland Shire. Coming up next, George Ivanoff.
2SR, supporting Australian talent.
Now to introduce my guest today, sorry, a bit tongue-tied today. George Ivanoff is an author of over 70 books, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show. He's a stay-at-home dad residing in Melbourne, and he's written 70 books for children and teenagers, including fiction and non-fiction. These include school readers, library reference books, chapter books, novelettes, novels, and even short story collections. He has books on both the Victorian Premiers and New South Wales Premiers Reading Challenge book lists, which is very impressive. George is also a Doctor Who aficionado. Here to tell us a little bit more about himself is George Ivanoff. George, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
George, tell me, what is the George Ivanoff story?
I'm just this guy who writes stuff, I guess. But in a nutshell, I'm 45 years old. I'm married to an amazing woman named Kerry, and we have two terrific kids, Nikita and Lexi.
Oh.
As you mentioned, I've been a stay-at-home dad now for a number of years, and my writing schedule is based in and around the schedule of my two children, who seem to have a much more busy life than I do. But things are set for a bit of a change next year. My youngest daughter, Lexi, will be starting school. So as of February next year, I'm going to be about as full-time as I'm ever going to get, I guess.
So you have real young ones then?
Well, yes, my youngest, Lexi, she's just about to turn 5.
Okay.
And her older sister's 10, so she's well on the way in school.
You won't know yourself with an empty house.
I know it's going to be a little bizarre, really. It'll be quiet. That'll be a novel experience.
I've got
a quiet household.
I've got a few more years before I get to the quiet household, so yeah, I'm looking forward to it. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, I believe.
Well, it'll be different, but it'll mean a lot more writing time for me. So
well, that's good for us.
Well, it'll be really good in that I think I'll finally be able to reclaim my evenings, because I do a lot of my writing at the moment after the kids have gone to bed.
Sounds familiar, yes.
So it'll be nice to have evenings off again. I'd forgotten what that's like.
All right. Well, George, in honour of your being on our show today, we have dedicated today's music to you and your great love for sci-fi. You've actually written a Doctor Who story for the UK Short Trips Defining Patterns anthology. Tell us all about that.
Right. Well, that's something that I actually chased. Being, a huge Doctor Who fan, I was desperate to write some Doctor Who. So I guess it's a good example, I guess, of how persistence can pay off. For a writer. So it's a bit of a long story, so if that's okay?
Go for it.
Okay. It all started with me going to a sci-fi convention, and I met another author who had written several stories for the Doctor Who Short Trips anthologies that were being produced at the time. And, we went out for coffee, and, I expressed how jealous I was that he got to write Doctor Who stories and I didn't. And he said, oh, look, next time they're doing an anthology, I'll tell my editor about you and give him your email address. So he did that, and I got invited to pitch story ideas, and I went into complete fanboy overdrive and said, I can write this, or I can write you this story, oh, no, I can do this story too. And I sent in like about half a dozen ideas, to which I got a very polite thanks but no thanks reply.
Ouch.
And I thought, oh, well, there you go. I've just wrecked my one and only chance. But several months down the track, I noticed that the publisher, Big Finish Productions, was holding a short story competition for a Doctor Who story. The winner would be published in the next Short Trips anthology. So I thought, damn it, I'm going to enter and I'm going to win this comp. And then I read the fine print, which, of course, said that it was only open to amateur writers, and anyone who's had anything published professionally can't enter. And I thought, well, doesn't matter, I'm going to enter anyway. So I wrote a story to the theme, and I sent it off with a cover letter that said, look, I know that I officially can't enter this competition, so just consider this an unsolicited submission. The due date passed. The competition winner was announced. It wasn't me. And I thought, oh, well, that's it. But then several months down the track, I got an email from the editor, the same editor who had rejected all these story ideas that I'd previously sent them. And he said, look, I really enjoyed your story. And there was almost this air of surprise in the email that, oh, you can write after all. We can't use your story because we don't need another story on this theme, but we liked it so much that we'd like to commission you to write a story. And that's how it happened. I got commissioned to write this particular story, which was a Fourth Doctor story, and it appeared in the anthology.
And the rest, they say, is history.
Yes. Unfortunately, the publisher then didn't have its contract renewed, its license renewed to continue publishing those short story anthologies. So it was my one and only shining fanboy moment.
Oh, what a shame. But still you still had that one moment. So.
I still did have that one moment. And you know, I console myself by writing about Doctor Who for pop culture publications.
And I've seen you definitely are a Doctor Who fan.
Yes, I am. A little obsessive, some people might say.
Yes, just a little. Anyway, when did you realise that you wanted to be a writer, George?
Well, it was sort of a gradual realisation, really. It wasn't. I didn't have this epiphany moment or anything. It just kind of built. I guess it would have started back when I was in high school. I remember we spent an entire term doing creative writing at school in English, and I think that's when I realised that I really liked making stuff up.
Right. Okay.
And basically, I've been writing fiction ever since. Mostly for my own amusement at first, and then for various amateur publications, because being a big science fiction fan, I was a member of loads of different science fiction clubs, so I'd write for their newsletters and their magazines. And then somewhere along the line I thought, well, you know, maybe I could make a little bit of money out of this, and so I started submitting stuff to professional publications, and eventually I started to get accepted. I still remember the very first piece of writing that I had professionally accepted was an article about the Regent Theatre in Melbourne, which was published in one of those, freebie newspapers that get given out around the CBD in Melbourne.
Yes.
And I got paid the princely sum of $30.
Wow.
It was very exciting at the time. Very exciting.
Did you frame your cheque? I assume it was paid by cheque.
It was paid by cheque, and no, I didn't frame it. I went down and cashed and spent it immediately.
Okay.
I take a somewhat practical approach to these things.
I think most authors are like that with their first one, aren't they? And then they think afterwards, when they're quite successful, I wish I had framed that first one now. Yeah,
it would have been nice, but
you're never quite sure if the second one's coming along.
The wonders of hindsight, huh?
Yes. So how do you come up with your story ideas? Because you've got some excellent books out there. How do you get your mind into those characters and as I said, it's all sci-fi. It's kind of out there.
Yeah, I know, but despite being sci-fi, I get my story ideas from real life. Ideas are everywhere. They're all around you. They're in the things that I do. They're in the things that I see and read about and hear about. They're in the people that I meet. They're in the things that my friends tell me that they have done. They're in the things that I hear when I'm eavesdropping on conversations on a train trip. Or that ideas are everywhere, and with me, it's quite often a case of taking, a moment of real life and then asking what-if questions and exaggerating it out of all proportion into something that can be a story. My gamers books, they all came about because of a documentary I watched on television about online gaming.
Okay.
And I was fascinated because there were all these people being interviewed who were talking about these amazing games that they were playing that were full of death and destruction and fantastical creatures. And then they'd talk about how ordinary and boring their lives were. And I thought, well, what if you flipped that? What sort of games would people who lived extraordinary, exciting lives filled with magical creatures and death and destruction, what sort of games would they play? And that's what sparked it all off.
Okay.
And that, became a trilogy of books. And it works with, more down-to-earth ideas as well. I've got a short story collection called Life, Death and Detention.
Right.
And the title story, I think, is a really good example of using my own life. It was a case of me thinking back to my years at high school. And at high school, I was a very nerdy, geeky kid and tended to get bullied a bit.
Right.
But I was a good student and I didn't get into trouble very often. But, I found myself in the occasional detention.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, nerdy, geeky kid stuck in detention. And I used that as a starting point. Then I started asking the questions, well, what if the only other kid in detention that afternoon was the bully that was making nerdy, geeky kid's life miserable?
Okay.
What if there was an emergency in another part of the school and the teacher got called out of the room, leaving the two of them in there together alone?
Right.
And then finally, because I wanted something really dramatic, what if nerdy, geeky kid had found his father's gun that morning and has brought it with him to school and it's sitting in his school bag under his desk? So, it's a case of, taking something very ordinary and then just building on it and making it something extraordinary, something that you can turn into a story.
Okay, well,
so that's where most of my things start.
That's very, very interesting to look at things sort of on the flip side and let your imagination run away with them, I guess. Thanks for joining me this afternoon on the Author's Shelf. I'm chatting with author George Ivanoff. On our last show, I asked Paul Collins what's the key to writing a great series. George, how about you tell us what your secret to a great series is?
I'm not sure that there is a secret as such. The Gamers trilogy was my first proper series, so it's been a huge learning curve for me. And I think what it really comes down to is planning. Now, when I first started writing it, the first book, Gamer's Quest, I had no idea it was going to become a series. Gamer's Quest was planned as a standalone novel. Despite this, I did a lot of background planning for it because it's set in a computer game world. So I needed to know how that world worked, even if everything I planned didn't show up in the novel. So I had worked out the rules and everything of this particular world and how it worked. But I also worked out the world around it, the world in which this game existed. And none of that ever showed up in that first book. But I needed to know it all in order to be able to tell the story. And I'm so pleased that I did that, because then when, the first book was successful enough for a sequel, and my publisher asked me to write one, I was able to go, yes, I can do this, because I know there are other things out there and I know what they are. And so that helped greatly. If I hadn't have done that with that first book, I think I would have been in real trouble trying to write a second and a third book. So I think the key, now that I've just vocalized all of this, I think the key is planning, knowing the world in detail, and knowing how it works. I think that's what's important, yeah.
And how do you write? Do you just sit down at a computer and type it all out, or do you, the old pen and paper method? Do you use a storyboard method where you have little post-it notes everywhere in your office?
I am a planner, and I go through a very definite process each time. I start off with a notebook, so pen and paper, and I keep this notebook with me, and I jot down random ideas to do with the particular project. So once I had this idea of setting a story in a computer game world, I got this notebook and I just started writing down all these ideas, character ideas, set piece ideas, story snippets, sometimes even, fully formed paragraphs and stuff of a scene that just popped into mind. So all of this would go into this notebook, and I'd have this mishmash of ideas. And then I would sit down and plan the story out. I'm a planner. I need to know where a story is going. I can't write a novel without knowing the ending before I start writing, because I tend to be a bit of an overwriter, and without that plan, I would just meander all over the place and my story would never actually get anywhere. So I do a story outline, which is basically, dot points for each chapter. So the first book, Gamer's Quest, would have been something along the lines of Chapter 1, introduce the main character of Tark. Tark steals a magic sword. Chapter 2, follow the supporting character, Princeling Galbraith. After Tark has stolen his sword, he vows revenge. Chapter 3, introduce next main character of Zyra, and so on and so on. So I need to have that there. Then once I have that plan, then I tend to write from beginning to end as quickly as possible without thinking too much about it. It's a matter of getting the story out of my mind. So I'll have my plan, and then I will just write. And if along the way I change my mind, I go with it. If suddenly I decide to kill off a character that wasn't meant to be killed, I'll kill them and move on. If my character suddenly take me in a different direction that I wasn't expecting, I'll go with it.
Okay.
The end result is a first draft which is pretty, crap, basically, that makes very little sense. And then I redraft. I then, try to fix up the story to make sure that it all makes sense, that the beginning matches up with whatever the new, further parts of the story are. And then it's a constant process of refining over a number of drafts. So each of the Gamer's books went through approximately 10 drafts.
Wow, okay. All right, well, thanks for that, George. You're listening to The Author's Shelf on 2SSR 99.7 FM, Sound of the Sutherland Shire. Welcome to our listeners in the ACT, Melbourne, and a listener in Germany today. Thanks for listening. We'll be right back after this short break. If you'd like to interact with us during the show today, you can send us a message via our Facebook page, facebook.com/The Author's Shelf, or you can tweet us at The Author's Shelf. My guest today is George Ivanoff. George, what's the best piece of advice you've been given in relation to your writing?
The best piece of advice, that actually came from Paul Collins, who I believe was a guest on your show a little while ago.
Last show, actually.
And that is, never give up. Be persistent. Just because one publisher rejects something that you send them doesn't mean that the next publisher you send it to will reject it. Doesn't mean that the next thing you send to that same publisher will be rejected. You've got to keep working at it, and you've got to keep trying. And I think that is really the best piece of advice I've gotten in terms of writing.
I think so, definitely. And yes, Paul was a guest on our last show. George, are you living your dream job? If you weren't an author, what do you think that you'd be doing?
Yes, I am living my dream job. Well, before I became an author, I worked in web development. So I imagine I would probably still be in web development if I hadn't changed courses. I don't think I could return to it now, because web development has changed a lot since I was doing it. I mean, when I started, I was doing, raw coding by hand. Now it's all database driven and content management systems and stuff, and I wouldn't have the foggiest about how to do that.
Okay, tell us about some of your other books that you've written.
Okay. Well, I'll start with Life, Death and Detention, because that was actually my very first book. It was published back in 1999 by Margaret Hamilton Books, which is a branch of Scholastic. And it's also one of my most recent books because I had the chance last year of updating it, of taking the stories out of the 1990s and bringing them into the 21st century, giving them a slight rewrite and polish, and the book then got re-released. So I was very pleased about the chance to revisit an old book like that, and I'm very happy to have it back out in print because it's probably one of the most personal books that I've written. It's a collection of short stories, 10 stories set in and around life in high school, and every single one of those 10 stories is in some way, shape or form based on my own experiences. But as I said earlier, taken to an extreme, taken beyond anywhere I actually went. So, yeah, I never brought a gun to school like in that story I was telling you about before. I never held a teacher hostage like what happens in another story. I never did a lot of the more dramatic things that appear in the stories. But each one of the stories is in some way based on reality. So, yeah, I'm really, really pleased to have that book out there. Let's see. The other sort of writing I do is education writing.
Right.
I do a lot of school readers and school and library reference books for primary schools.
Great.
So they're a very different writing experience. Because unlike a novel, which is all author-driven, I'd come up with the idea and I'd write the book and then I'd, find a publisher for it. With education writing, it's all publisher-driven. So the publisher will approach me and say, we need a school reader that's 1,500 words aimed at grade 2 level. It needs to be a science fiction story with a twist. Go. And I'd go off and produce that story.
That's
a very different style of writing. Different process.
But definitely one that we need in schools. So yes, very, very well done there. It's currently 35 minutes after 12 o'clock. You're listening to The Author's Shelf. We're going to take another short break, and when we return, George will read us an excerpt from his book, Gamers Rebellion. Now, George is going to read for us an excerpt from Gamers Rebellion. So, George, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Okay, I'll just give you a little bit of background first. The Gamers books are about two characters inside a computer game called Tark and Zyra. In the first book, they're in a game and they don't know it. In the second book, they know they're in a game and trying to get out. And in the third book, they finally get out. So in this scene, Zyra, in the real world, is talking to a man named Robert. He's the creator of the game that she used to inhabit. Okay, so here we go. Zyra shook her head. It's silly. This is the real world. The game wasn't real. Yet my memories of it feel more real than... She spread out her arms. This. Sometimes I feel like I'm just a character in a game, said Robert. Like I'm the one being manipulated. Zyra raised an eyebrow. Robert stared at her for a moment, then lowered his eyes. Sometimes I have this notion that we are just one world within many. That this reality is merely a game within somebody else's reality. That we are here to entertain and amuse. He paused and looked up to meet Zyra's eyes. Worlds within worlds within worlds within ad infinitum. Perhaps all of creation is just a game. Games within games within games ad infinitum. So, this isn't really reality? Zyra looked confused. Who knows? Robert sighed. What is reality anyway, aside from what we make of it? And I'll stop there. I chose that little bit because one of the main themes that run through all three books is notions of reality and what is real and what is not. So I thought that would be a good bit to read.
That was great. Where can we pick up a copy of Gamers Rebellion? Or in fact, the whole trilogy?
The whole trilogy. Look, they're available in all good bookshops, or probably even in bad bookshops. I don't know. If your bookshop doesn't stock it, simply ask them to order it in. The 3 books are definitely available. Alternatively, there are a lot of online stores that stock it, and it's also available. They're also available as ebooks through Amazon.com.au.
Excellent. I'm Georgie Donaghy and you're listening to The Author's Shelf. My guest today is George Ivanoff. George, I believe your talents aren't limited to the page. In fact, you've appeared on one of Australia's longest running dramas, Neighbours. Tell us a little bit about that. George Ivanoff, the actor.
Oh, goodness me. Neighbours was a very long time ago. That was back in the 90s, and I played a pot plant delivery man who brought a pot plant to the wrong location. I had all of 3 lines, and I was credited on the end credits just above the dog.
Oh, was that Bouncer the dog?
Yes, good old Bouncer.
Oh gosh, and I haven't watched Neighbours for a very long time, so that's sad. I remember that.
I don't do very much acting. I refer to it as my occasionally paying hobby. Although I've got to admit, it's been a long time since I've been paid for an acting job. I've done more short films and stuff that I haven't been paid for than acting that I've actually been paid for. But yeah, look, it was it's fun. I really enjoy acting, and I am trained. I'm a graduate of the National Theatre Drama School here in Melbourne, which actually, interestingly enough, I think contributed more to me as a writer than it did to me as an actor. Because part of the whole acting training process is learning to trust yourself, learning to take risks, all of which have contributed to me as a writer and also to my writing career, because I don't think without having learned to trust myself and take risks, I don't think I ever would have chucked in my day job to become an author. So it was a very, very important step, I think, in my writing career.
Sutherland's local radio station, 99.7 2SSR FM.
George, what's the best piece of advice that you can give to emerging authors?
Read lots, write lots, and as Paul Collins has said, never give up. You need to read lots because reading is actually a form of learning about writing. You learn about stories, story structure, and the way stories are told. And, of course, the more you write, the better you get at it.
And with that lead in, if you're an emerging children's author or illustrator and are looking for somewhere to display your work, why not visit creativekidstales.com.au? There you'll find a complete publisher's listing, competition information, writing tips, and a whole lot more. It's a great site to assist you on your journey to publication. And in 2014, we're going to be having some really exciting things happening on the website. So stay tuned and look out for that one. George, I have to ask you, you've been dropping hints all over Facebook. What is the secret project that you're working on at the moment?
Well, it's only semi-secret now. It's been partly revealed. So I can tell you it's a new series of 4 books that, although they're part of a series, they're all standalone stories, so they can be read in any order. And the first 2 will be published in May next year by Random House Australia. Wow. And I'm very, very excited about this project, and I wish I could tell you more. I wish I could reveal the subject matter.
Oh, you can. Come on.
I can't just yet.
We won't tell anyone, promise.
I can tell you that the revelation will happen early next year, and that if you're interested in knowing what it is, just keep tabs on my website, which is georgeivanoff.com.au.
Excellent. And also keep an eye on you on Facebook. And we're going to talk to you on Creative Kids Tales in July next year, so you can tell us a lot more then too.
Well, yes, the first 2 will have been published by then, so I'll be able to tell you everything about it.
Oh, that's good. George, thank you very much for being our guest today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And as George said, if you'd like to learn more about George, his books, or his acting, please visit his website, georgeivanoff.com.au, and that's IVANOFF.com.au. Well, that's about all from us this year on The Author's Shelf. Thank you for your support and for joining us. We'll be back on the 12th of January with our first guest for the year, Jacqueline Harvey. Stay safe this new year. We look forward to bringing you more wonderful authors in 2014, including the newly announced Australian Children's Laureate, Jackie French. She'll be chatting with us in February. Stay tuned for that one.